with that, we're really honored to have with us, he made it, Bob Blumenfield, to talk to us about and have a conversation with us about LA City Hall and updates about our beautiful city. Just a little background about Councilmember Bob Blumenfield. He was elected to the LA City Council in 2013. He was reelected in 2017. He represents the 3rd Council District, which spans the northwest portion of the San Fernando Valley, including Canoga Park, Reseda, Tarzana, which is where I'm from, Winnetka, Woodland Hills. At City Hall, his policy priorities have included crafting the city budget to maximize public dollars, transforming the city's technology infrastructure to more effectively manage resources, and growing and improving the city's physical and environmental infrastructure to make LA safe, clean, and a green-friendly place for people and businesses. He's also been very committed to social justice, equality, ending homelessness, which we hope to hear a bit about today, and the opportunities for all Angelenos. Before he was the LA City Council member, he was served in the California State Assembly from 2008 to 2013, working for all of the San Fernando Valley communities that he continues to represent. And prior to that, 1989 to 96, he actually worked in Washington, D.C. as a staff person to Senator Bill Bradley and Congressman Howard Berman, and as a staff designee to the House Budget Committee. So, and lastly, I thought it was important to point out he's also served on numerous nonprofit boards, including the Anti-Defamation League. He's a graduate of Duke University and the UCLA Anderson School of Management and Business Executive Program. Bob, we're really happy to welcome you to our Hazak program today. You can either hold it or, okay.
Oh, okay. Great. I will do that. I won't walk all the way to the piano. I was going to do a number on the piano, but I'm told I have to stay within the camera range. So no. Yeah. So no piano recital today. Sorry about that. And I'm here, and Jeff Jacoberger, my staff, is over here as well. It's an honor to be with you all here today. As mentioned, my name is Bob Blumenfield. I'm your city council member. Some of you I know, some are familiar faces, and there's some new friends here who I haven't met. So I look forward to getting to know you all, and really using this chance to talk about really any issues that you want to talk about. As mentioned, I've been involved in government in a variety of ways on multiple levels, both at the federal level. As you mentioned, I worked for Howard Berman, among others, and I was his ledge director in D.C., and was his district chief of staff here. Was very involved when the earthquake hit in '94. That's really what connected me to this community. When that earthquake hit, I was the point person for the emergency assistance money, and then for the next year and a half, I spent helping businesses and individuals recover from that. So that's always been seared into my consciousness. Emergency preparedness, something I take very seriously as formerly as an assembly member and as a council member. And I'm happy to talk about those issues as well, because as we all know, it's not an if, it's a when. And we know the next disaster is coming, and we want to make sure that we are all prepared individually and collectively. And we can never be fully prepared, but we can take those critical steps that we need to take. So a lot is changing in the world of government, both on the local level and the national level. Obviously, you heard there was a recent election. And the president has changed, and that's going to have big implications for the whole world, but for us here in Los Angeles on many different levels. And we're going to have to figure out how we adjust to that. I am worried about a lot of the federal funds that we had been getting for a variety of things, both when it comes to emergencies. I mean, this is the former president who talked about not funding us when the California fires hit. So we're going to have to figure out how to be more self-reliant, because FEMA may or may not be there for us. We were very lucky in '94 when the earthquake hit, because FEMA was really at its apex. James Lee Witt was the head of it, and we worked really closely with them, and we got $14 billion worth of aid. And years after that, FEMA kind of went by the wayside, and you all remember when Bush was president and Katrina, and Brownie was the FEMA director, and that was a disaster for a lot of reasons, but because FEMA had kind of become less of a priority for the administration. So I worry about that from our perspective. I worry about homelessness, how we get a lot of money from the federal government from HUD, and how that money trickles down, and whether or not we'll continue to get the critical funds that we need. I worry a lot about immigration issues on the national level. I mean, the President-elect Trump has talked about rounding people up, and how that plays in Los Angeles, the city with the most immigrants, is going to be very tricky. As a city, we have, since Chief Darrell Gates, have had a policy that the police do not turn people over to ICE, which is a good policy, by the way, I think, because if you do start cooperating in that way, and even Chief Gates recognized this, then people are less likely to come forward with tips, people are less likely to be open with the police, and crime will go up. So that's an important policy that we've had since Gates, but how that plays with this new administration is going to be very tricky. I think he's going to want to make an example, and he's going to, within the first few months, have roundups of immigrants, and probably do that here in Los Angeles and in other places. So that's something we need to figure out how we are going to react to as a city, and what we're going to do about that. And I can talk about different aspects of that if you're interested. I want to just give you sort of a brief overview and then really open it up to questions and discussions, because I'm happy to talk about any issue under the sun that you wish to talk about. We can talk about my daughter's a freshman at USC this year and all of the trials and tribulations of that, but that's probably not what you came to talk about.
So Bob, maybe yes. I could start.
Sure.
Before we get into the policy and difficult issues, tell us a little bit about you. How did you get interested in politics and public service and serving in government?
Oh, well, I should sit down for that one. That's a long one. But I mean, I didn't grow up thinking I was going to run for office. That was never my plan. I did grow up, I was a very active, interested in sort of the world around me. I was a young journalist for a group called Children's Express that existed, and I was a youth journalist, and I attended, back then, the Democratic and Republican national conventions at the age of 12. I have a weird streak. I've been to every national Democratic nominating convention since and including 1980, so for almost 47 years. But it started that way as a youth journalist, and I got involved in that, and I thought I wanted to go into journalism after college, and I had been a public policy major, but I was interested in journalism, but I got a little frustrated. I did some internships, and things were moving too quickly. The news people were all excited about capturing this young woman who had drowned, and it just turned me off. So I thought at that point, in my life, documentary filmmaking. So I looked around as a young person. I said, I'm going to work for a documentary filmmaker. Who's the best documentary filmmaker? People gave me this name of a guy named Ken Burns. And he wasn't famous yet. And I went and knocked on his door, and I asked him for a job, and he said no. And so I asked him a few more times, and he kept saying no. And then finally I said, look, I'll work for free. I just want to be around it. I can live in my parents' house. I just graduated college. And he said, great. And then he's like, you can come in a few days a week, kind of like an internship. And then I said to him, well, but I got to eat. I need to make something because I need to eat something. And he's like, all right, well, you'll get lunch every day. And I said, oh, that's great. What do you guys serve? And he said, no, you'll go out and you'll get lunch for everybody every day, and you'll bring it back in, but there'll be a little something extra for you. Long story, so I worked for Ken Burns on the Civil War documentary. I decided, though, I didn't have the patience for that. They took longer to make the Civil War documentary, and it's a beautiful documentary, than if they had filmed the Civil War from beginning to end live. And I didn't have that patience. I appreciated it, and Ken Burns and Rick Burns, the way that they could spend an hour working on 3 frames was fascinating, but I realized I really enjoyed the other aspects of it. I enjoyed when they met with the historians. He let me, this is probably way more than you wanted to hear about backstory, but he let me work the projector when the historians came in for the confidential meetings, and that was fascinating to me. So I thought, okay, I'm going to find something in between filmmaking, long documentary form, and journalism. And one of the people who was working on that film was going to work with Ted Koppel on a series on political leadership in D.C. And so I decided that I was going to work for that person and work on that series on docu-series on political leadership in D.C. So I moved to D.C. The only problem is I didn't actually have a job doing that, nor had they promised me that. And then it turned out Ted Koppel decided not to even do the series. So I was living in D.C., but I had gotten really excited about this idea of studying political leadership, and you can sense a theme. And so then I said to myself, you know, I don't need Ted Koppel to study political leadership. I'm going to work on Capitol Hill and study it myself. And so I started knocking on doors on Capitol Hill for an entry-level job, and long story short, I fell in with Senator Bill Bradley from New Jersey, Dollar Bill, if those of you remember him from his basketball days. And that was a great experience, and every time I kept thinking I would leave Capitol Hill, something would come up and I would continue to work there. So I worked for him, and then I was going to leave Capitol Hill, and then this opportunity for Howard Berman came up, and I had such respect for Howard Berman that I started working for him. And he was such a great guy to work for. I worked kind of my way up there, and I became his legislative director, and the earthquake hit, and then I was focused on that. So long story, I worked for him for a number of years, and then decided to get out of politics entirely, you know, and just do what everybody does when they move to LA, is to write a TV show. So I moved to LA to write a TV show. It didn't get made. I did sell it. It was a story about young people working in Washington on political issues. This is probably not what you came to hear about, but you asked me, so. What's that?
I have to know who I'm voting for. You know.
Yes, well, although you're not voting for me right now because I'm termed out. I'm on my final term in the city council, but maybe I'll run for something else. I'll give you a chance to vote for me for something. But giving you my quick thumbnail life story, I was doing that, and then I ended up working for the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy because I had worked with Joe Edmiston of the Conservancy on a number of different issues, and I had lunch with him. This was after the '96 presidential campaign, and I was the coordinator for the San Fernando Valley for the Clinton-Gore presidential campaign. And he was saying to me, what are you going to do? And I was telling him all this entertainment stuff, and he's like, well, what are you really going to do? Everybody does that in LA. I said, that's what I'm going to do. And he says, well, come work for me while you're doing all that. And I said, no. But I love the Conservancy and the work that they did. And he convinced me. He said, look, we can't pay you very much, but we'll give you a house to live in and a car to drive in Malibu. So I lived for a number of years in Malibu in Solstice Canyon. Have anyone ever been to Solstice Canyon? As you walk up Solstice Canyon, there's a house that's now burned down on the side of the road that was a caretaker's house. And I lived in that house for several years, working for the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy as their director of government affairs, helping them put together a water bond and a park bond, and getting sort of the Sacramento bug because I would work with them on working with the state. And at the same time, he gave me the flexibility, because I was the director of government affairs, to do some of the writing stuff I wanted to do. So I did some of the Hollywood stuff. But I worked for Joe Edmiston in the Conservancy for a number of years until Howard Berman said his district chief of staff was leaving, and he was asking me if I could work for him for a little while to try to merge his, it was a long story, but the district office and the Capitol office were kind of divergent trails, and he asked me to come and help put that together. So I worked for Howard again, because I love Howard, and he was working for him. I got a lot done. And anyway, long story, did that. The opportunity came up to run for state assembly. I took it, and I won, and I served in the legislature for a number of years as the budget chair because we were in economic freefall, and they said, throw the keys to the new guy because the house is on fire. And I was proud to say I brought the assembly state from the verge of insolvency to surplus during my tenure as an assembly member. But that's how I got involved in a very long roundabout way.
Sounds like a movie.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about homelessness.
Yes.
We were driving home from the theater last night. There's still people on the sidewalks in tents. There were people at the corners, asking for money. This seems like an unsolvable problem. Big problem, complex problem. We actually have a hot topics discussion group that discussed the homeless issue in LA recently. $22 billion to solve it, supposedly. over 10 years maybe, but all that money doesn't seem to be going to where it's supposed to. What's going to happen? What do we do? What role do you have or can we play in solving this problem?
Great question. And there's not $22 billion in the system. That was an estimate that someone made of what would it take to house everybody and solve the problem. Just to be clear that there's not, if there were $22 billion on the table right now, I think we could make a lot of progress. But, you know, homelessness is interesting. I think it is solvable, or at least getting down to functional zero. You know, when I first ran for office in the city council, homelessness was not the issue in 2013. I don't think there was one town hall meeting I did where people mentioned homelessness my first year running. Since then, it is the topic. In fact, it has eaten up more of what, you know, me and my team work on than anything else. You know, now I have 3 homeless deputies exclusively working on homelessness, trying to place people and work on that. It's a topic everybody brings up, but it wasn't that way 10 years ago. So what changed, and how do we change that back? A lot of things have changed in that time. I mean, you can't ignore the fact that we don't have enough housing, and that the price of housing, you know, the old expression, the rent is too damn high, is very true. I mean, you all know what it would take to rent an apartment now. I mean, to rent an apartment now is probably costs more than the mortgage that most of us in this room are paying on our homes, which is crazy when you think about it. And that's not an exaggeration. So that's a big function of it. Another real factor that we have to look in the eye that a lot of people don't like to look at is drugs. The ubiquity of fentanyl and some of these drugs that are so addictive and so cheap, they are destroying this country and people's lives left and right. I mean, most of the people that you encounter on the street, and I do homeless outreach. I'm very hands-on. I do homeless outreach personally several times a month. And, you know, so people are surprised. I actually know a lot by first name many of the homeless people on the street. Like when someone comes out with me to do outreach, they're often shocked because the homeless folks actually know me and say, "Oh, council member, you know, glad you're here," and you know. But most of them it may not be the fact that's keeping them homeless, but have suffered from either substance abuse or mental health issues. That doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean that they can't, you know, and some of them, maybe they're not suffering from it, and that may not be the only thing that's keeping them down, but it is a reality that we need to deal with. Now, it's tricky on the policy-wise because the city, you know how many drug addiction programs the city has? Anyone want to guess? 0. Drugs, mental health is all under the charter, is handled by the county. So all of the funding that goes for those programs is done through the county. So it's this delicate balance where you have to work with the county. There's an agency in the middle of all this called LASA, which is a joint powers authority between the city and the county, which I think is a big mess, was never made to deal with an issue this big. It was created years ago when homelessness was much smaller. But to get more to a 10,000-foot level, and then I can come back down to the specifics, I think we need a balanced approach, an approach that is, you know, first and foremost compassionate, and that is giving a helping hand to folks who want it and need it, and where we're providing addiction services, mental health issues, where we're providing ways to get to housing. But we also need to be, I don't think that we should be allowing folks to encamp anywhere they want to encamp. And that's a controversial statement for some folks. I mean, there is a policy in the city called 4118. The numbers specifically deals with the municipal code section 4118. It used to be in the city of LA, you were not allowed to sleep on the streets or it was ruled unconstitutional, and basically everything was opened up. There was some controversy. I authored something, a new version of 4118 to say, well, in certain spots, critical corridors and other areas, we should be allowed to make them off limits to encampment. But before we do that, we should go in and offer services to anybody who is at those locations. That was actually, that little statement there was very controversial, and in fact is still very controversial, and several, members of the council want to get rid of 4118, and we just had an election this cycle, and one of the people who was a supporter of 4118 was replaced by someone who wants to get rid of 4118. I think there's still the votes to keep it in place, but that's what I'm saying. Politically, there's a little bit of a balancing act on something as simple as that. There's also been, in dealing with the streets, there have been a lot of court cases that have made it very difficult to manage the streets the way that we used to manage the streets. Like it used to be, if you had a bulky item, the city would say, you can't have a bulky item on the sidewalk, and the city would take it away. Then Garcia versus City of Los Angeles case came up, and the judge said, you can't do that, you can't discriminate based on the size of an object. There were a number of different cases that came up that made it much more difficult for the city to remove someone from the street or tell them that they can't be in a certain location. Now, recently, there was a decision that went the other way, which you may have heard of. It's called the Grants Pass decision. Have anybody heard about that? Okay, so that was in the news recently. That's a major decision that went all the way to the Supreme Court, where municipalities had been prohibited from, I don't want to use too many negatives, they had been prohibited from prohibiting encampments on the streets under this grants in the city of Grants Pass. The Supreme Court said, and based on what was that point, maybe I'm getting too much in the weeds, but it was an Eighth Amendment argument saying it was cruel and unusual to say to someone, you can't be on the street, you have to move. The Supreme Court came down and they said, you cannot use cruel and unusual, that only applies to after a conviction, and therefore all the case law that prevents you from removing people based on the Eighth Amendment is null and void. So a lot of people said, oh, that means cities are going to start removing people left and right. Some cities are trying to do that. Los Angeles has been very slow to do that because we're the ones who get sued on everything. We get sued, by the way, on everything, and we lose a lot. And because juries don't tend to think that city money is real, they don't realize it comes out of our services, our police, our fire, our potholes, and so the judgments are ridiculous. And this is, I know I'm jumping topics, but this is a big issue for our budget right now, and I chair the budget committee and very focused on the numbers for the city, but we set aside $100 million a year for liabilities lawsuits. We spent that already. Then we spent another $60 million from our mid-year adjustments. Then we spent another $23 million, and we still have $76 million more of judgments that we have to pay, not that we have an option of paying. So we set aside $100 million. We're already over $300 in judgments that we have to pay out. And this is causing a big financial strain on the city. We're probably going to have to do a judgment obligation bond to borrow some money. I jumped away from homelessness except to say that that's part of the financial issue. So the big issue on homelessness is how do we solve it? I think there's multifold. One, we need to have places for people to go. We can't force people to go to places, but we need to have places, and that means interim sites, meaning temporary sites. When someone's on the street, for them to get into a site where they can get their lives stabilized, and then supportive housing, affordable housing, family reunification, programs like that. In my district, when I came to office, there were 0 homeless intervention sites, 0. Since then, I've put in enough homeless interventions to house every homeless person that was in the district at the time 4 years ago. And so that means we did tiny homes, which is like these cabin communities, these 8x8 cabins. We have 52 of those units behind my office, 74 more over by the Orange Line in Tarzana. We did congregate living, which is what we call bridge home. We have one on Canoga and Satakoy. We've done permanent supportive housing. We have about 6 or 7 of those. We did a family housing, which is the old 818 hotel on Ventura and Winnetka. Has been converted into a family shelter, which houses almost 200 families, 200 people. And we're just opening up a new senior one. My immediate goal for the next few weeks, in the 3rd district, I want to eliminate senior homelessness in the 3rd district, and it is possible in the 3rd district. It's a small area because we're opening up this facility called the Elderberry 186 rooms, all for folks who are elderly is considered 55 and older. I don't like that because I'm over 55. So we have the units, and we're now, like with all the outreach workers, I've said, drop everything you're doing. I want anyone who's over 55 who's homeless on the streets in the 3rd District to get into that elderberry. And I want to take everyone from our interim sites, meaning the cabin communities, who's willing to get them into that elderberry. So my hope is that senior homelessness in the 3rd District, at least for a short period of time, will be eliminated in the next month. And then veterans housing, we've had a major breakthrough there too, which is one of the chief things that, and veterans housing, of course, all homeless housing is tears at your heartstrings. Senior, especially when you see someone who's elderly who's on the streets, and when you see someone who served our country. One of the big barriers for veterans who were homeless was that their disability check, because oftentimes they're disabled in some way, gave them enough income that it disqualified them from getting the housing voucher. And so last year, the mayor and I and 2 other council members went to DC, and we met with Secretary Fudge, who's the housing. We met with the veterans. We met with everybody under the sun who would listen, the chairs of the 2 houses in the Senate and the House. Long story short, it finally paid off. This last month, they finally basically said that the disability money will no longer be considered part of their income when it comes to the housing vouchers. So we're seeing a lot of veterans who didn't qualify for housing before qualifying. So veterans housing is going to take a major jump in the next few weeks, which is very positive. And there's a lot going on at the VA administration we could talk about with Judge Carter and what he's doing there. Again, maybe too much in the weeds, but I'll open it up. Sorry for such long answers. I'll try to keep my answers shorter.
No, okay, let's pass it around. Questions? I'm going to start right here.
I wondered, what is your anticipation of this threat of mass deportation? I have a beloved person who's losing sleep over it. How are they going to do this? Who are they going to hit? I mean, some people have been working here 20 years with driver's license and pay their taxes. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know the answer. I am worried. I am very worried about what's going to happen. As you mentioned, because a lot of times when Trump and other folks talk about it, they don't even differentiate. They're talking about, will they go after folks who've been here with temporary protected status, who've been here for 20 years and have a green card or work permit? Are they just going after undocumented folks? What does that mean? What does that mean for families? It's very concerning. We saw the beginning of it in Trump's first administration, but I think they were just getting up and running. So I think it's going to be much worse coming forward. And I don't know what it's going to mean, but I do know that LA is going to be center stage. Well, the question was, is there any way that we could, how can we protect folks who are, who might be rounded up in these, one of the things is to get people to know their rights. And I was talking to my team about trying to put together some forums so that people know their rights, and that folks who may get caught up in a sweep like that, but that have a right to be here, are able to exert that right. So getting people informed of what their rights are. Another thing is that in Los Angeles, we're not going to be turning folks over, in the sense that they may want us to do it, and that's going to cause some friction between the city of LA and other cities and the federal government. So that's going to be part of it. So I don't know.
Question coming back on the homeless situation. Obviously, there's the temporarily and the chronically homeless. Temporarily may have some family issues, financial issues, and even young adults who leave their homes for various reasons, or wives trying to escape from family situations. And then there's the chronically ill, who are been there more than 6 months, who have serious health issues, mental health issues, and wondering, first off, in the housing that you're looking at, are you looking at one group more than the other? And we should obviously, for those with drug or mental issues, have facilities, particularly to care for those problems and help them alleviate them, or at least somehow get over them.
No, I agree, and it's not always so easy to categorize everyone because people, these categories are very fluid. Someone falls into homelessness for economic reasons, but in order to keep from getting robbed at night, they take some substances, then they get hooked or something like that. Or so it's not always so easy. The county is supposed to take the acute folks who are mentally ill and drug addicted and house them separately than these interim sites that the city is building. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen. This is a frustration I have with the county, and there's a lot of back and forth going on with a alliance case where we're not suing each other, but there's an MOU debate happening and trying to figure out how that happens. Because I agree with you, it's counterproductive when you have someone who's severely mentally ill or drug addicted in a small community like the interim community. It makes it very difficult for folks who are trying to get off of drugs or not use drugs to be in that situation. So there needs to be different approaches for different issues that people have. And there certainly are. I mean, every category that you mentioned, there is a specialty program, but there's not enough of any of these things. And there are more people on the streets than there are beds for them and treatment programs. And the other piece is, it's very difficult to get, like I've been in situations, I'm doing outreach, and I come across a guy who, is not wearing a shirt, it's 30 degrees, he's got feces on, I mean, I don't want to describe, but he's clearly out of his mind. And I had to call county mental health to come. I'm like, you got to come take this guy, he's killing himself. He's and so they send someone out, and it's very difficult to get someone out. As a council member, I had to call personally to the county to make this happen. And then they come over and they say, well, are you a threat to yourself or someone else? Are you an immediate threat? And the person had enough sanity to be like, no, I'm not going to kill anybody or do it. And so like, well, there's nothing we can do. And so they walk away. And part of that is some of the laws have to change, and some of them aren't regarding conservatorships. That needs to be, we place a high premium in this country on personal freedom, and I understand that and respect that. But at the same time, when someone doesn't have the capacity to care for themselves, or they're doing something that's killing themselves, we need to, as a society, be able to get them out of that situation, get them medications that they might need to get them back on their feet. Because a lot of the folks who are out there are in that category, who are, either mentally ill or taking drugs. They're not thinking clearly, and we as a society don't. You can do what they call a 5150 hold on someone if they're an immediate threat to themselves or someone else. But that's a rare situation, and even that is sort of it's a short 48-hour hold. We need to, I think Newsom's idea with the drug courts, I think is good. And I think we're also going to see some differences. In this last election, there were two other big changes that happened vis-a-vis not so much homelessness, but drug use and some of those issues. One was Prop 36, which passed, which, for better or for worse, I mean, there's good and bad in Prop 36, but it will force more choices. It will, where folks are going to be faced with jail or treatment, and many of them will choose treatment. Some folks will end up in jail for offenses that probably aren't jail-worthy, but such as such. We'll get more people who, and then the other thing that changed here was our district attorney. Gascon is now Gascon, and we have a different district attorney who's going to be much more inclined to prosecute folks, and we'll see if that and there's good and bad in that, and how that plays out, but it will have an impact on the way that homelessness is dealt with, because it's very difficult. And the police, part of it's also the police don't really want to be dealing. We end up making the police do everything in this city because they're the only agency that's besides fire that's 24/7, and really they're not equipped to deal with homeless and mentally ill. And nor do we want them. Do we want to be paying the full price of uniformed officer to be dealing with a mental health issue. It's one of the reasons I'm very bullish on what we call alternative response programs and getting alternative to the police as a supplement, not as a replacement, but as a supplement to policing. And we've been doing that in the city very successfully. We're growing these programs. This started a number of years ago. Actually, I was the first one to bring it to the city. I had heard about this program in Eugene, Oregon, called the Cahoots program. And the Cahoots program, they're able to divert 17% of their 911 calls to this alternative response. And the alternative response is made up of social workers and people with lived experience and people who are trained in de-escalation. And it was very successful in Oregon. They've been doing it for 30 years. And so I brought the police chief here from Oregon and some of the people who run the program, and I did a webinar with them, which is still available on my website, to talk about could we do something like that here in Los Angeles. And then we put a motion together to get that to happen. We've now built a program that dwarfs the Eugene, Oregon program in size, but not on a per capita basis. So in Oregon, it's Eugene, Oregon's like this, and their program's like this. LA, we now have more alternative workers than they do, but we're such a big city that it's not, ubiquitous. We want to get to the point when you call 911, the operator is able to assess whether it goes to a police officer, a firefighter, or an alternative response. And we have one in this area called the Circle program that's operating in Encino. And so that is a good way also to deal with homeless issues and mental health crises that are happening on the street.
Carol here? Yeah. I was wondering if you are experiencing any anti-Semitism, or is the council having to deal with any anti-Semitism? I'm very concerned what's happening with the teachers union and their policies, which they're dealing, foreign policy, they're getting into foreign policy. So I'm wondering, are you experiencing this, and how are you dealing with it? And how could I do something about what's happening with the union? It seems so hard to get into everything.
Yeah, I wish the answer to that was no. I have no idea what you're talking about, but it's not. It's very real. I had to get a restraining order against someone who came to council and said, "I'm going to kill you and all your Jewish people," and and that's just another day in council. We have public comment where people say horrible, racist, anti-Semitic, anti-black, anti-everything things in public, and that's a whole other story that we need to get our hands around, because we've been prevented by the courts from having certain levels of decorum. And so if you go to city council meetings, it makes a circus look like a nice place. Maybe that's a bad way to say it, but some terrible things are said. And I am very worried about anti-Semitism across the city. Certainly what's happening in with the union at UTLA. How do we deal with that? I mean, part of it is educating people, and that's the best part of it, and having a counter narrative. I mean, when it comes to the city, I've been trying to really educate, especially my colleagues, on some of these issues, because, well, I don't know how else to say it, but like the Democratic DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. Have you heard of that group? Yes. So they, in their questionnaire, when they're vetting candidates, one of their questions says, will you boycott all Israeli products? Another one says, will you say the city can have no more educational trips to Israel? Will you say, and a lot of really terrible things that are on that questionnaire. And I've had several colleagues who've been endorsed by the DSA. Obviously, I have not been endorsed by the DSA and have issues with them. But I've been trying to create a counter narrative. So like when especially around, when October 7th happened, I immediately put together a press conference to get the city to stand with Israel during this critical time. And I got 13 out of the 15 members of the council to stand with me in that press conference. And I knew I had to do that quickly, because I knew after Israel struck back it would be more difficult. But that was an important milestone. And then other things I've been doing on the council, like I brought a number of hostage families to the council and to meet with council members behind closed doors. And in fact, without naming names, I mean, there was one particular council member who is a DSA person and is very far left and a socialist, and I found a hostage family member who was also a kibbutznik, you know, but very far left person. And I thought I should introduce them to each other because they could speak to, you know, I was telling my colleague, I'm like, look, you don't really know socialism. Like the original socialists, the OGs of socialism are the kibbutzniks, like the folks who live on the kibbutz. And anyway, I got the two of them together, and he really said that opened his eyes in many ways. He had no idea. I mean, you know, the narrative that so many people are fed about Israel and colonizing, and you know, and they just have no understanding of the broader picture. Part of it is anti-Semitism in some cases, but part of it's just ignorance in other cases. So trying to educate people as much as possible is the way I think the best thing that we all can do in this room is to educate folks about the issue and to get them to see the bigger picture, because the narratives that are out there that are trending is really going in a very awful, wrong way. Yeah. Oh.
I really appreciate your focus on the specifics, especially of the homeless problem, because that's very visible to us. But to be honest, there's a long checklist. This is a senior group. We lived literally in a different century. That's what we grew up in. It wasn't like this. And so we all have, I think, a long list of dissatisfactions with the turns that society has taken, and some of them I think are very justified. Unbelievable crime issues, failures of education, breakdowns of manners even. So I wondered if I'm not a doctor, but if we took the medical analogy, you're talking about the ER of running a city, and that is very far from preventive medicine. And so I wonder if late Saturday night, when you're sitting around thinking, if you ever conclude that there has to be a root kind of cause or group of causes that are leading to this, and if you ever think about, is it poverty? Would that be the base thing that doesn't get dealt with ever, because poor people seldom achieve positions of power in administration? So, but do you ever think of maybe there is a root cause that would minimize or give us a leg up with respect to everything, the housing that's financially related, the mental health and drug issues and the crime issues? So do you think that we have to husband some resources to attack poverty?
Absolutely. No, and I don't think there is one root cause, but there are several big causes that are churning, that are, you know, you can do all the things on the ground that you want, but if you don't deal with the root causes of a problem, you're not gonna ever get out of it. And certainly poverty is a big piece of it, and the growing income disparities that we're seeing. You know, the economy is doing really well right now, but the income disparity is not. You know, that gap is waning. So, you know, how do you address that? And a lot of the trends, you know, the automation is putting more people out of work. And you think about some of the bigger trends with AI. You know, one of the biggest things of our middle class is drivers, and you know, we're not going to have drivers in 10 years. You know, you already have cars. I was in a Waymo the other day that's driverless cab running around downtown. So trucks, all those driver jobs are going to be gone. AI is going to replace a lot of other jobs. So we're going to need to think differently of how we we prevent that widening gap, because that's also often what tips over societies too. So the poverty issue is a very real one, and it's inextricably linked to housing. Obviously, if there was better income distribution, we wouldn't have the housing. The markets would be different. But there's no one root cause of it. I mean, I do think the drug issue is real, the poverty issue is real, the income inequity is real, the loss of jobs from sort of the rapid loss of jobs. We've always had changing society as technology grows, but it's happening at such a rapid pace right now that we're not able to transition as fast as we used to, and going from the industrial age to the information age. But going from the information age to the AI age, it's so exponentially faster, people aren't able to adjust as quickly. But those are issues also that can't be dealt with just as a city. Those are issues that really we need the federal government and the state, really everyone needs to lean in and row in the same direction, because it's way beyond what the resources that a single city, even as big as Los Angeles, can deal with.
I'm a little frustrated about this because, Karen Bass came into office to solve the homeless issue. I'm not feeling that we're really making a lot of progress. Am I wrong? And then you mentioned earlier, just another side note, the complexity of the governance structure in LA County. We've got how many cities competing?
88.
We've got the county. There's really no overriding, coordinated agency that's really attacking this problem. So, I'm not getting a good feeling that things are really going to improve. Can you help me?
I don't want to give you a false sense of security, so I'm not going to help you in that way. But I'll be honest with you, and I do think progress is being made. I don't think it's fair to say nothing is being done. You look at, the homelessness numbers did for the first time go down rather than up in the last homeless count, so that's positive. You look in the streets, you see there are so many more interventions now that are coming online. The city, we passed Measure H, which helped construct a lot of new facilities, affordable housing facilities. That made a big difference. The mayor passed what's called ED1, Executive Directive 1, which really streamlined the ability to build affordable housing, and we're seeing the results of that happen. But everything, for every yin, there's a yang, and as we streamline these processes, some folks want to streamline even more and open up every single family neighborhood to building apartments, and I would venture to say that most of the people in this room would probably object to that. That would solve the housing crisis overnight if you just said there's no more zoning restrictions, but most people are not prepared to go that direction. So how do you use the zoning to create more density without completely stripping single-family neighborhoods of their character and whatnot? So there is progress being made. The numbers did go down. The housing that was built from Measure H is finally coming online. A lot of that's happening. Is it happening fast enough? No. Am I frustrated like you are? Absolutely. I can't begin to tell you. I want to blow up LASA, which is the entity that goes in between. I've been very outspoken on some of this stuff. I've actually been to court with Judge Carter, who has this alliance case, and rather than sort of trying to say, oh, the city shouldn't be part of it, I'm stepping in with the judge saying, yeah, let's go after this and audit, and because there's not enough accountability on some of this. But I wouldn't just say, oh, the mayor said she'd solve it and she didn't solve it. She's been leaning in, and actually a lot of folks are concerned the opposite. They're spending so much money on homelessness that we're ending up hurting a lot of our other basic city functions. In fact, and we as a city have taken on spending our infrastructure and our general fund on some certain services that by charter we're not even supposed to do. That's all supposed to be the county. And you'd think now that the county just passed Measure A, which gives a half-cent sales tax, that they'd be able to take that on more. But I don't see that happening overnight. And in fact, with the prices going up, even for all the service providers, I don't know that we're going to get more than we already have for the new money that we got. So there's a lot of good reasons to be frustrated. I share that frustration and express it quite often. But but at the same time, I do think that the mayor has really been leaning in on homelessness almost to the detriment of other critical functions of the city.
Specific question concerning homeless. Is the city or is it just the county able to purchase hotels that may not be used as tourist traps, so to say, and they can repair those hotels for the homeless? And number two, if you're patient and wait another 3 or 4 years, there's going to be some openings on the county.
Thank you. So first part, and I appreciate the second part of the question. I won't address that. I'll just say, from a fellow Bob, thank you for that part. But for the first part of the question is, can we purchase hotels? The answer is yes. Now, getting the money to do that is the tricky part, but we have been purchasing hotels. There was a state grant program called Project Home Key. It was originally Project Room Key with COVID to get people off the streets and into hotel rooms. After COVID went away, it turned into Project Home Key, meaning to change hotels into permanent supportive housing. And in my district, we've done that. When I mentioned earlier the Elderberry, that hotel that is going to now become senior permanent housing, that was a hotel called the Extended Stay Hotel, located on Ventura Boulevard, just west of Winnetka. That hotel is an example of the city purchasing a hotel and changing it. Similarly, in my district, we recently purchased the Super 8 Hotel on Topanga, just north of Canoga. There was a Tadai sushi restaurant that was there as well. All of that's part of the property. That is being changed, has been changed into permanent supportive housing. The hotel part is already, and the sushi restaurant is being converted right now. So it is happening. It's not quite the panacea that it might sound like, because it sounds like, oh, that's great, it's so much cheaper. It doesn't end up being that much cheaper. It is a good way to get quick housing stock, but you end up having to make it all ADA accessible and all this other stuff. So it is good to do it, but it's not magically that cheap at the end of the day.
So Barbara, we got 2 minutes left. So
I'm a Latino fan, a big Latino fan, and I've got a very easy question for you.
Yeah.
If you go to take a look at the gross domestic product, our Latino community in this country contributes trillions, not billions and not millions of dollars. We live in a city and a state and a federal government that is in deficit to the tune of trillions of dollars. I want the community to know the contribution that these people make. I don't want to focus on getting them out of the state. I want them to be elected to office. I want them to teach other people how to have the kind of amazing work ethic they have. It's time to do that. And you folks can help. Let's let the public know what they contribute. Trillions of dollars. I looked this up. I could not believe my eyes. I wanted to find out, why are we in a deficit? Well, these people are not part of the problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, Latino community is a huge part of our city. It's the majority of our city, population of our city. And people often don't realize undocumented folks actually are propping up the Social Security system. How is that possible? Because what ends up happening is undocumented folks, in order to work, they give a fake Social Security number. So they pay into the system, but they're never able to pay out of the system. So in what you're saying is sometimes there are benefits that we have with undocumented that go unseen, that are worth noting. You know, and in this city we certainly embrace all of our immigrant populations, and the Latino population is no exception, and is the dominant group in the city of LA. So I appreciate the comments.
So please join me in thanking Councilmember Blumenfield to joining us today. Bob, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We could spend another hour.
I enjoy being able to just chat with you all. I urge you also to check out my website. There's a lot of good information there. And if you have any issues with the city of Los Angeles, whether it's a pothole, which potholes get fixed, by the way, that's one of the success stories of the city with our 311 system, or anything else, just contact me, contact Jeff, contact my office. we're here to serve, and thank you very much for the opportunity today.
I've got a street light